I pushed open the door to my bedroom and froze. Two men in paint-splattered overalls were covering my peach-colored walls with thick brushes, white paint dripping down in streams that obliterated the color I'd chosen so carefully. My floral curtains, the ones I'd sewn myself from fabric I'd found on sale at the Eastern Market, lay crumpled in a heap on the floor like discarded rags. My dresser, the one I'd restored by hand over 2 long weekends, had been shoved into the middle of the room with open cans of paint sitting directly on the lacquered wood surface I'd worked so hard to perfect. Kenneth, my 37-year-old son, leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed, wearing that self-satisfied grin he got when he thought he'd pulled off something clever. Beside him, Crystal, my daughter-in-law, was scrolling through her phone with that smug expression she always wore when she thought she'd won. The painter's brushes froze in mid-stroke when they noticed me standing there, and the younger one looked at me with an uncomfortable expression, like I'd walked in on something I wasn't supposed to see. The smell of fresh paint hung heavy in the Detroit afternoon air, mixing with the rage that was starting to boil up from somewhere deep in my chest. What is the meaning of this? My voice came out weaker than I wanted, thin and uncertain, the voice of someone who'd just worked a 12-hour shift at the Blue Plate Diner and come home to find her sanctuary violated. I had just gotten back from the restaurant, a place where I'd spent the last 18 years of my life preparing meals for other people's families, flipping pancakes and frying chicken and making meatloaf while they celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, while my fingers got burned on hot pans and my back ached from standing over stoves. My feet throbbed in my worn work shoes, the cheap ones I bought at Payless because I couldn't afford better. My back protested from the hours spent bent over prep tables and fryers. My uniform still smelled of bacon grease and maple syrup. But none of that mattered now, not compared to what I was seeing in my bedroom, in the space that was supposed to be mine alone. Crystal looked up from her phone and gave me that fake sweet smile she used when she wanted something, the one that never reached her eyes. "Oh, Mama B, you're home early. We're just making a few improvements before we move in." Her voice was casual, light, as if she was commenting on the weather or discussing what to have for dinner, not announcing that she was taking over my bedroom. "Move in?" The words felt strange in my mouth, foreign and wrong. "What are you talking about?" Kenneth straightened up from his casual lean against the doorframe and walked toward me with that confidence that had always made me uncomfortable, like he was already certain I'd agree to whatever he wanted. "Ma, we wanted it to be a surprise. You know, this room is way too big for just you, and Crystal and me, we need more space. The kids are getting bigger, and our apartment over on Gratiot is just too cramped. We can barely move in there." My legs started to tremble, not from exhaustion, though God knows I was exhausted, but from something deeper, a rage mixed with disbelief, mixed with the terrible understanding that this moment had been coming for a long time. 22 years I'd worked in restaurant kitchens across Detroit. 22 years breathing in grill smoke and fryer oil, enduring complaints from difficult customers, scrubbing industrial sinks until my hands cracked and bled, all to save every single dollar that would let me buy this house. This house, my house. The first thing in my entire 64 years that was truly mine, that nobody could take away from me or tell me I had to leave. The older painter coughed uncomfortably, his brush dripping white paint onto the drop cloth. "Ma'am, if there's a problem here, we can stop the work and come back another day." "No, no, keep going." Crystal waved her hand dismissively, as if she owned the place, as if this bedroom was already hers to command. "We've already paid you. Might as well finish the job today while we're all here." "Paid? With what money?" I wanted to ask, but I already knew the answer. The money I had lent them just last month when Kenneth lost his job at the automotive parts factory, when Crystal had come to my door crying about how they were 3 months behind on rent, how the landlord was threatening to evict them, how they'd end up on the street with 2 babies if I didn't help. The money I'd taken from my savings account, the one I'd been building for years in case something happened, in case I got sick or hurt and couldn't work anymore. Kenneth came closer and put his hand on my shoulder with a familiarity that no longer brought me any comfort. "Ma, don't get all worked up about this. It's just paint. We're making it look better, more modern. Plus, we've already talked to a contractor. We can divide the house into 2 separate living spaces. You'll have your area downstairs, and we'll take the upstairs, like one big happy family all under the same roof." One big happy family. The word sounded hollow, empty, like something from a television commercial trying to sell an idea that didn't exist in real life. I looked at my curtains crumpled on the floor, the ones I had sewn myself after watching YouTube tutorials because I couldn't afford to buy ready-made ones. I looked at the paint stains spreading across my dresser, the piece of furniture I had found at an estate sale on the east side, and spent 2 entire weekends sanding down and refinishing, my hands covered in sawdust, my back aching from bending over it. "And who decided this?" I asked, feeling my voice getting stronger, feeling something inside me starting to push back against this invasion. "When did you 2 sit down and plan out the future of my house without even thinking to ask me what I wanted?" Crystal sighed dramatically and put her phone in her back pocket, like I was being unreasonable, like I was the one causing problems. "Mama B, don't be so dramatic about everything. You always get difficult when we try to do something nice for you. Look at this ugly peach color you had on the walls. It looks like something from the 1980 seconds. The white is going to look so much more modern and clean. You'll see. You'll thank us later." "Beautiful for who?" I wanted to scream. "Modern for who?" I had chosen that peach color after days of comparing paint samples at the hardware store, holding them up to the light coming through my bedroom window, imagining how it would look when the morning sun came through. That color reminded me of the sunsets I used to watch from the window of my old rented apartment on the west side, back when I was still dreaming of having my own walls that I could paint any color I wanted, back when home ownership seemed impossible for someone like me. The painters kept working, their brushes making soft swishing sounds against the wall, pretending not to hear our argument, but I could feel their uncomfortable glances every time one of us raised our voice. The younger one had paint splotches even in his hair, and I wondered how much Kenneth and Crystal were paying them for this rush job, this invasion of my privacy that they'd orchestrated without my knowledge or consent. Kenneth walked around the room like an inspector examining his property, running his hand along the windowsill, checking the corners where the painters were working. "Ma, just look at it. It's going to be so much brighter in here once they're done. And when we bring our furniture in, when we get everything set up the way Crystal wants it, you'll see what a huge difference it makes." She already found a beautiful bedroom set on sale at that furniture outlet on 8 Mile. Real wood, not that particle board garbage. Their furniture in my room. Their belongings filling the space I had claimed for myself. The room where I'd finally been able to spread out, to have a real bed instead of a pull-out couch, to have a dresser and a closet, and walls that were mine to decorate however I wanted. Crystal walked over to my vanity, the small table where I kept my drugstore perfumes and my hand creams for the cracks and calluses I got from washing dishes all day in scalding water. She picked up one of my bottles, examined it with barely concealed disdain, and set it back down carelessly. "Oh, and all this clutter we can organize so much better. You don't need all these things taking up space, Mama B. When you get to a certain age, you need to start simplifying your life, getting rid of stuff you don't really need anymore. Simplify my life, as if my small collection of cheap cosmetics and hand lotions were junk, cluttering up their grand plans. As if my 64 years on this earth had turned me into an inconvenient obstacle they needed to work around, an old woman who needed to be managed and controlled and told what was best for her. I felt something crack inside me, not break completely but fracture, a fissure running through whatever patience and maternal accommodation I'd been holding on to. It wasn't just the fresh paint covering my beloved walls, though that was bad enough. It wasn't just the furniture moved without my permission, or my curtains thrown on the floor like trash. It was the way they had decided my future so casually, so naturally, as if I were a child who couldn't be trusted to make my own decisions, as if I were an old piece of furniture that needed to be rearranged to make room for what really mattered, which was them and their needs and their plans. I thought about James, my late husband, who had died 14 years ago from complications of diabetes. He'd worked at the steel mill for 30 years, breathing in metal dust and chemical fumes, destroying his body so we could pay rent and keep food on the table. When he died, he left me with beautiful memories and a $5,000 life insurance policy that barely covered his funeral expenses. After he was gone, I stayed in the apartment we'd been renting since we got married, paying $650 a month to a landlord who raised the rent every single year without fixing the broken heater or the leaking bathroom pipes. Kenneth had been different when he was a boy, I thought, watching him gesture around my room like he owned it. He'd been a shy kid who would run to hug me when I came home from my shifts at whatever restaurant I was working at back then. He'd help me fold laundry while telling me about his day at Crockett Technical High School, about his friends and his classes, and his dreams of getting a good job at one of the auto factories like his father. But something had changed when he met Crystal 7 years ago. She'd come into his life like a storm, full of expensive tastes and grand plans. She talked about designer handbags and trips to Las Vegas, and living in one of those new condo developments downtown where young professionals were moving. At first, I'd thought it was good that my son had found an ambitious woman, someone who wanted more out of life than just getting by. James had always been content with what we had, happy with simple pleasures, and I'd worried that Kenneth had inherited that same acceptance of limitation. But I'd soon discovered that Crystal's dreams came with a price tag that other people had to pay. When they got married 9 years ago, I'd lent them $1,200 for the wedding reception at that banquet hall on the east side. Money I had saved dollar by dollar, keeping it in a coffee can hidden in the back of my closet because I didn't trust banks after the 2008 financial crisis. They'd promised to pay me back within 6 months. That was 9 years ago, and I'd never seen a penny of it returned. When their first child was born, they'd needed $900 for hospital bills that their insurance didn't cover. When the second baby came 2 years later, they'd needed $550 for a crib and a stroller and baby clothes because everything from the first child had been lost in storage or given away. There was always an emergency, always a crisis, always a promise that they'd pay me back as soon as Kenneth got his next paycheck, or as soon as Crystal's hours picked up at her job at the call center. I'd never ask them for the money back. A mother doesn't charge her own son interest, I'd told myself, repeating it like a prayer whenever I looked at my dwindling savings account. But deep down, in a place I didn't like to examine too closely, I knew that my generosity had become their expectation, that my maternal love had been transformed into an obligation to fund their lifestyle choices. And now they were here, in my bedroom, painting over my walls, moving my furniture, planning to take over my house piece by piece until there was nothing left that was truly mine. "Stop," I said, my voice cutting through the sound of brushes against wall, through Kenneth's casual monologue about how much better everything would be, through Crystal's continued scrolling on her phone. "Stop painting right now." The painters looked at each other, then at Kenneth and Crystal, uncertain about who they should be listening to. The older one lowered his brush slowly. "Ma'am, we're about halfway done with the first coat. If we stop now, you'll have this half-finished look." "I don't care about half-finished," I said, my voice getting stronger with every word. "This is my house. This is my bedroom. And I didn't authorize any of this." Kenneth's expression shifted from confident to irritated. "Ma, we already talked about this. We need a place to live. Our lease is up next month, and the landlord is raising the rent to $1,400. We can't afford that. You have all this extra space just sitting here empty." "We didn't talk about anything," I corrected him, feeling my hands clench into fists at my sides. "You made a decision about my property without consulting me. There's a big difference between talking and telling, Crystal finally looked up from her phone, and I could see the calculation in her eyes, the shift from playing sweet to showing her real feelings. Mama B, I don't understand why you're being so selfish about this. Kenneth is your only son. We're family. Families help each other out. Or is your comfort more important than your own grandchildren having a decent place to live? There it was, the guilt trip, the manipulation that Crystal was so skilled at deploying, making it seem like I was the villain for wanting to keep my own home, for objecting to having my bedroom taken over without permission. My grandchildren, I said carefully, have a place to live. You have an apartment. It may not be as big as you'd like, but it's shelter. And if the rent is too high, you can look for something more affordable instead of trying to move into my house without even asking. More affordable? Crystal's voice rose, losing its fake sweetness entirely. Have you seen what rent costs in Detroit these days? Everything decent is at least $1,200 a month, and that's for a 2-bedroom in a bad neighborhood. We need 3 bedrooms. Kenneth Jr. is getting too big to share a room with his baby sister. We need space. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you spent Kenneth's last paycheck on those new sneakers I saw you wearing, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. The ones that cost $300. Or before you got your nails done at that expensive salon in Royal Oak. Crystal's face flushed red. How dare you judge how I spend my money? I work hard. I deserve to treat myself once in a while. Treat yourself with money you're asking me to lend you? I shot back. With money you borrow for rent and then never pay back? Kenneth stepped between us, his hands raised like a referee at a boxing match. Okay, let's everybody just calm down. Ma, I know we should have asked you first. That's on me. But we're here now, the painters are here. We've already paid them half up front. Can we at least finish this one room and talk about the rest later? No, I said firmly. No, we cannot finish this room. This is my bedroom, Kenneth. Mine. I worked for 22 years to be able to afford this house. I ate rice and beans for months to save up for the down payment. I worked double shifts on holidays. I sacrificed everything to have a place that was mine, where nobody could tell me to leave, where I could finally have some security after a lifetime of renting from landlords who didn't care if the heat worked or if there were rats in the walls. The younger painter started packing up his supplies, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding. Look, maybe we should just go. You folks can figure this out and call us when you're ready. No, you stay, Crystal commanded, but her authority was hollow now. The painters looked to me, recognizing that I was actually the homeowner, the one whose decision mattered. Please pack up your things, I told them, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I'm sorry you got caught in the middle of this. If they actually paid you, keep the money for your trouble, but I need you to leave now. They nodded and began gathering their drop cloths and paint cans with practiced efficiency. Kenneth watched them work, his jaw clenched, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Ma, you're making a huge mistake. Where are we supposed to go? You want your grandkids to be homeless? Kenneth, stop being dramatic. You're not going to be homeless. You have a lease for another month. That gives you time to figure something out. Look for a cheaper apartment. Ask Crystal's mother for help. Get a roommate. There are options that don't involve taking over my house. Crystal's mother lives in a 1-bedroom, Kenneth said, and she's already told us she can't help. Then maybe you need to make some different choices, I said. Maybe Crystal needs to work full-time instead of part-time. Maybe you need to get 2 jobs instead of waiting for the perfect factory position to open up. Maybe you need to live within your means instead of expecting me to subsidize your lifestyle. Crystal grabbed her purse from where she'd set it on my dresser, her movements sharp with anger. Fine. If that's how you want it, we'll leave. But don't expect us to come running back when you're old and sick and need someone to take care of you. Don't expect us to put you in a nice nursing home. You'll end up in one of those state-run facilities where they warehouse people who have nobody who cares about them. The threat hung in the air, ugly and mean-spirited. This was who Crystal really was, I realized. Not the sweet daughter-in-law who called me Mama B and brought the grandkids over for Sunday dinner. Not the struggling young mother who just needed a little help to get back on her feet. This was the real Crystal, the one who saw me as a resource to be exploited, and when I refused to be exploited, she showed her true face. "If that's what happens, then that's what happens," I said quietly. "But I'd rather end up in a state facility having lived my last years in my own home than spend them being taken advantage of by people who see me as nothing more than free housing and a source of money." Kenneth looked between his wife and his mother, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. Part of him knew I was right. Part of him remembered being raised better than this. But Crystal had her hooks in him deep, and he'd chosen long ago to keep his wife happy no matter what it cost. "Let's go," he said to Crystal, though his voice lacked conviction. The painters had already packed up and headed downstairs. I could hear them loading their van, probably relieved to be escaping the uncomfortable family confrontation. Crystal stormed past me without another word, her shoulder deliberately bumping mine in a childish display of aggression. Kenneth paused at the door, looking back at his childhood home, at the mother who'd raised him alone after his father died, at the woman who'd worked herself to exhaustion to give him opportunities. "Ma, I hope you know what you're doing. Blood is supposed to be thicker than water. You're choosing a house over your family." "No, Kenneth," I said, my voice heavy with sadness. "You're choosing your wife's greed over your mother's dignity. There's a difference." He left without responding, his footsteps heavy on the stairs I'd had refinished last year, walking out the front door I'd painted myself last spring, leaving me standing in my half-painted bedroom with my heart breaking and my resolve hardening. I heard their car start, heard them drive away, and then the house fell into a silence that felt both peaceful and terrifying. I stood there in my bedroom for a long time after they left, looking at the half-painted walls that now told the story of this violation. Half peach, half white, a physical representation of the boundary I'd just drawn between my old life of accommodating everyone and my new life of protecting what was mine. My hands were shaking. My heart was racing, but underneath the adrenaline and the shock, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. I had stood up for myself. I had said no. For maybe the first time in my entire relationship with Kenneth and Crystal, I had refused to let them walk all over me. I walked downstairs to the kitchen, my legs feeling weak, but my spirit feeling stronger than it had in months. I needed coffee. I needed to sit down. I needed to process what had just happened and figure out what came next, because I knew this wasn't over. Crystal wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. She would regroup, come up with a new strategy, find another angle to get what she wanted, but I'd crossed a line today that I couldn't uncross. I'd chosen myself over their demands, and there was no going back from that. I was sitting at my kitchen table, nursing a cup of instant coffee and staring at the wall, when my neighbor Vincent knocked on the back door. He was a retired auto worker, maybe 70 years old, who lived in the house next to mine and kept an eye on the neighborhood. "Bernice, you okay?" I saw some commotion earlier, people leaving looking angry. I let him in and told him the whole story, about Kenneth and Crystal showing up with painters, about them planning to take over my house, about the argument and how I'd finally told them no. Vincent listened without interrupting, his weathered face growing more concerned with every detail. "Bernice, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen carefully," he said when I finished. "These kinds of situations, they can get legal real fast. You need to protect yourself. You need documentation. You need a lawyer." "A lawyer?" "Vincent, I can't afford a lawyer. Do you know how much they charge?" "I know a guy," Vincent said. "Michael Jenkins. He does a lot of pro bono work for seniors in the neighborhood. Let me give him a call, see if he'll come talk to you. No charge for a consultation. You just need to understand your rights before this goes any further." I wanted to refuse. I wanted to believe that it wouldn't come to that, that Kenneth would come to his senses, that this was just a family disagreement that would blow over. But something in Vincent's expression told me he knew better, that he'd seen this kind of thing before, that he understood how quickly family disputes could turn into legal nightmares. "Okay," I said finally. "Call your friend, I'll talk to him." Vincent made the call right there from my kitchen, explaining the situation in shorthand, using terms like adverse possession and property rights that made my head spin. When he hung up, he smiled reassuringly. "Michael says he can come by tomorrow after 5. He wants to look at your deed, any paperwork you have, and talk about how to protect yourself." That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Kenneth as a little boy, about the times I'd tucked him into bed and kissed his forehead, about how he used to help me carry groceries and tell me jokes to make me laugh after long shifts. Where had that boy gone? When had he turned into a man who would try to take his mother's house without even asking? But I knew the answer. Crystal. Not that Kenneth wasn't responsible for his own choices, but Crystal had brought out the worst in him, encouraged his entitlement, fed his resentment of having grown up without much money. The next day at work, I was distracted, burning toast and forgetting orders, my mind spinning with worry about what Kenneth and Crystal might do next. My coworker Joanna, who'd been working at the diner almost as long as I had, finally pulled me aside during a lull in the lunch rush. "Bernie, what's going on with you? You're not yourself today." I told her everything. Joanna listened with increasing anger, her dark eyes flashing with outrage on my behalf. "Girl, you need to change your locks. Today. Right now. If they have a key, you need to make sure they can't get in when you're not home." "They don't have a key," I started to say, but then I stopped. Did they have a key? How else would they have gotten in with those painters? I always locked my doors before I left for work. Oh my God, Joanna, they must have made a copy somehow. Maybe when they visited last month and I left them alone while I ran to the store. "That's breaking and entering," Joanna said firmly. "You need to call the police and file a report. And change those locks today. I can't call the police on my own son. Bernice, he broke into your house and hired people to paint your bedroom without permission. That's not a son respecting his mother. That's a criminal trespassing on someone's property." She was right, but the thought of calling the police on Kenneth made me feel sick. Still, I knew I had to protect myself. After my shift ended, I stopped at the hardware store and bought new locks for the front and back doors. The guy at the counter showed me how to install them, and I went home and spent 2 hours following his instructions, my arthritic hands struggling with the screwdriver, my back aching from bending over, but determined to finish the job. When I was done, I tested both doors multiple times. They were secure. Kenneth and Crystal couldn't get in anymore. Michael Jenkins showed up exactly at 5, just as he'd promised. He was a distinguished-looking black man in his 50s, wearing a suit that had seen better days but was clean and pressed. He carried a worn briefcase and had the kind eyes of someone who'd heard a lot of sad stories. "Mrs. Mitchell, Vincent told me what happened. I'd like to help if I can. First things first, do you have the deed to this house?" I showed him all my paperwork, the deed with my name on it, the mortgage documents showing I'd paid off the loan 3 years ago, the property tax receipts proving I'd been paying the bills. Michael examined everything carefully, taking notes in a small pad. "Okay, this is all very clear. The house is yours, free and clear. No one has any legal claim to it. Now, tell me exactly what happened yesterday." I walked him through the entire incident. The painters in my bedroom, Kenneth and Crystal's announcement that they were moving in, the argument, how I'd made them leave. Michael's expression grew more serious as I talked. "Mrs. Mitchell, I need you to understand something. What your son and daughter-in-law did yesterday could be considered breaking and entering, criminal trespass, and potentially fraud if they misrepresented to the painters that they had authority to make changes to your property. I don't want to press charges against my own son," I said quickly. "I understand that, but you need to be prepared for what might come next. People who are desperate or entitled, or both, they often escalate. They might try to claim they have tenants' rights. They might try to say you verbally agreed to let them live here. They might even try to forge documents to support their claims. I've seen it all, Mrs. Mitchell. Family disputes over property can get very ugly very fast. So what should I do? First, document everything. Write down exactly what happened yesterday, with dates and times. If they contact you again, save every text message, every voicemail, every email. Second, I'm going to draft a cease and desist letter, making it clear that they have no rights to your property and that any future attempts to enter without permission will result in criminal charges. Third, if they show up again, you call the police immediately. Don't argue with them, don't engage, just call 911. Will the letter be expensive? I asked, already calculating how much I had in my checking account. For you, no charge. Vincent's a good friend, and besides, I hate seeing seniors taken advantage of by their own families. It happens more than you'd think. I felt tears prick my eyes at his kindness. Thank you. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just promise me you'll follow my advice. These situations, they can escalate quickly. Your son and his wife, they sound like people who feel entitled to what you have. Those are the most dangerous kind, because they justify their actions by telling themselves they deserve it. Michael left me with his business card and a promise that he'd have the cease and desist letter ready within 2 days. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote down everything that had happened, exactly as he'd instructed. The date and time I'd come home, the painters in my bedroom, every word of the conversation with Kenneth and Crystal that I could remember. My hand cramped from writing, but I forced myself to be thorough, to capture every detail while it was still fresh in my mind. For 3 days, I heard nothing from Kenneth or Crystal. No calls, no texts, no attempts to contact me. Part of me hoped that maybe they'd accepted my decision, that maybe they'd found another solution to their housing situation, but a bigger part of me knew better. The silence felt ominous, like the quiet before a storm. I went to work, came home, checked that my new locks were secure, and waited for whatever was coming next. On the 4th day, I found out what they'd been planning. I was at work when my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something made me answer it. "Is this Bernice Mitchell?" a professional-sounding woman asked. "Yes, this is she, Mrs. Mitchell. This is Amanda Rivera from Adult Protective Services. We've received a report of concern about your welfare. I'd like to schedule a home visit to check on your living conditions." My blood went cold. A report? What kind of report? I'm not at liberty to discuss the details over the phone, but the complaint suggests you may be experiencing cognitive decline and could be a danger to yourself. The caller was very concerned about your ability to live independently. Kenneth and Crystal, it had to be. They'd called Adult Protective Services and made up lies about me, trying to have me declared incompetent so they could take control of my house. Miss Rivera, I assure you, I'm perfectly fine. I work full-time. I manage my own finances. I maintain my home. There's nothing wrong with me. I understand, Mrs. Mitchell, and this may very well be an unfounded complaint, but we're required to investigate all reports we receive. Can we schedule a time for me to visit your home? It's just a brief assessment. I had no choice but to agree. We set an appointment for the following Tuesday at 6, after my work shift. When I hung up, my hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down. This was Crystal's doing. I knew it with absolute certainty. She was trying to paint me as a confused old woman who couldn't take care of herself, who needed someone to step in and manage her affairs. I called Michael Jenkins immediately. He listened to my explanation and sighed heavily. This is a common tactic, unfortunately. If they can get you declared incompetent, they can petition for guardianship or conservatorship, which would give them legal control over your property and finances. But I'm not incompetent. Anyone who knows me can tell you that. I know, Mrs. Mitchell, and we'll prove that. But in the meantime, you need to prepare for this home visit. Make sure your house is clean and organized. Have your bills ready to show you're paying them on time. Maybe ask your supervisor at work to write a letter confirming your employment and performance. We need to build a clear picture that you're fully capable of independent living. The next few days were a blur of preparation. I deep cleaned my house until it sparkled. I organized all my financial documents into neat folders, showing my paid-off mortgage, my utilities always paid on time, my modest but stable savings account. I asked my manager at the diner to write a letter, and he did, praising my reliability and work ethic over 18 years. Joanna offered to be present during the home visit as a character witness, and I gratefully accepted. On Tuesday evening, Amanda Rivera arrived exactly on time. She was a young woman, maybe 30, with kind eyes but a professional demeanor. She introduced herself and explained that she'd be doing a basic assessment of my living situation. Mrs. Mitchell, I need to ask you some questions. What year is it? 2024. Who is the current president? I answered correctly. She asked me about my daily routine, my medications, which were just blood pressure pills I took every morning, my ability to cook and clean and manage my finances. I answered everything clearly and confidently, and I could see her initial concerns fading as we talked. She walked through my house, noting the cleanliness, the well-maintained condition, the organized state of my belongings. She looked at my financial documents, my work schedule posted on the refrigerator, the letter from my manager. Joanna sat with us in the living room, vouching for my mental sharpness and my independence. Mrs. Mitchell, Amanda finally said, I'm going to be honest with you. Based on what I've seen today, there's absolutely no evidence that you're unable to care for yourself. Your home is clean and safe. You're clearly cognitively intact. You have stable employment and good financial management. I'm going to close this case as unfounded. Relief flooded through me so powerfully I almost cried. Thank you. Thank you so much. However, Amanda continued, I should tell you that the person who filed this report claimed to be your son. He said you'd been forgetting things, acting paranoid, making accusations against family members. He sounded very concerned. My son, I said bitterly, is trying to take my house. When I refused to let him move in without asking me, he and his wife apparently decided to try to have me declared incompetent so they could control my property. Amanda's expression hardened. That's unfortunately more common than you'd think. I'm required to report suspected elder abuse, and what you're describing could fall under financial exploitation. Would you like me to file a report? I thought about it, about Kenneth, about the little boy he used to be. Not yet. But I'd like documentation that this complaint was investigated and found to be baseless, in case they try again. Amanda provided me with written documentation that the investigation had found no evidence of cognitive decline or inability to care for myself. She also gave me information about elder abuse resources and encouraged me to contact her if the situation escalated. After she left, Joanna hugged me tightly. Girl, you need to cut those people out of your life. They're not family. Family doesn't try to destroy you to get what they want. I know, I said quietly. I just never thought Kenneth would go this far. I never thought he'd try to have me declared incompetent. That wasn't Kenneth, Joanna said firmly. That was Crystal putting ideas in his head. She's the mastermind here. Your son's just too weak to stand up to her. She was probably right, but it didn't make the betrayal hurt any less. The next morning, I received a certified letter. My hands trembled as I signed for it and opened the envelope. It was from a law firm I'd never heard of, representing Kenneth and Crystal Mitchell. The letter claimed that I had verbally agreed to let them move into my house, that they had invested money into home improvements with my permission, and that they were entitled to tenancy rights. It demanded that I allow them to move in within 30 days, or they would take legal action. I read the letter 3 times, each time feeling my anger grow. Every word was a lie. I'd never agreed to let them move in. They hadn't invested anything. They'd broken into my house and hired painters without permission. I called Michael Jenkins immediately. He asked me to bring the letter to his office that afternoon. When I showed it to him, he read it carefully, his expression growing darker. This is all fabricated. They're trying to establish a paper trail that supports their false narrative. Do you have any text messages or emails where you refuse their request to move in? I don't think we ever discussed it in writing. It all happened in person, that day with the painters. That's unfortunate, but not fatal to your case. The burden of proof is on them to show they have tenancy rights. A verbal agreement isn't enough, especially when you're disputing it. And their claim that they made improvements with your permission is going to be hard to prove when the painters can testify that you ordered them to stop. Will the painters testify? If we need them to, yes. I'll subpoena them if this goes to court. But first, I'm going to respond to this letter with the facts. You never gave permission. They broke in. They have no legal rights to your property. And if they continue this harassment, we'll pursue charges for criminal trespass and filing false reports. The legal back and forth continued for weeks. Kenneth and Crystal's lawyer sent another letter claiming I was mentally unstable and couldn't be trusted to accurately remember our conversations. Michael responded with the Adult Protective Services report showing I was fully competent. They claimed they had witnesses who'd heard me invite them to live with me. Michael demanded they produce these witnesses. They never did, because they didn't exist. But the stress was taking its toll on me. I wasn't sleeping well. I'd lost weight. At work, I found myself making mistakes I'd never made before, mixing up orders, forgetting to refill coffee cups. My manager pulled me aside one day with concern in his eyes. "Bernice, I know you're going through something difficult at home. If you need some time off, we can work it out." "I can't afford time off," I said. "I need every paycheck, especially now with legal fees." "What legal fees? I thought your lawyer was pro bono." "He is for now, but if this goes to court, if Kenneth and Crystal actually file a lawsuit, I don't know how long Michael can keep working for free. He has a practice to run. I might need to hire him formally, and I don't know if I can afford it." That night, lying in bed in my half-painted bedroom that served as a constant reminder of this nightmare, I thought seriously about just giving up. Maybe I should let Kenneth and Crystal have the house. Maybe it wasn't worth all this stress and anxiety and fear. I was 64 years old. How many years did I have left? Maybe I should just find an apartment somewhere and let them have what they wanted. But then I thought about the 22 years I'd worked to buy this house. The double shifts and the burned fingers and the aching back. The times I'd eaten nothing but ramen noodles so I could put more money in savings. The day I'd signed the mortgage papers with tears running down my face because I was finally going to own something, finally going to have security. And I got angry. Not the explosive anger I'd felt that first day finding the painters in my room, but a cold, determined anger that settled into my bones and hardened my resolve. No, they weren't going to take this from me. I'd worked too hard, sacrificed too much, fought too long to give up now. The next morning, I called Michael and told him I wanted to move forward aggressively. "File whatever charges you think are appropriate. If they want a legal battle, they'll get one." Michael filed a motion for a restraining order prohibiting Kenneth and Crystal from coming within 500 feet of my property. He also filed a police report for criminal trespass based on their unauthorized entry with the painters, and he submitted all the evidence we'd gathered, the timeline I'd written, the cease and desist letter they'd ignored, the false report to Adult Protective Services, their lawyers' letters making provably false claims. The hearing for the restraining order was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, I tried to go about my normal life, but nothing felt normal anymore. I jumped every time I heard a car door slam outside. I checked the locks on my doors obsessively. At work, I found myself distracted, constantly checking my phone to see if Michael had called with updates. Joanna stayed close, bringing me food because she noticed I wasn't eating, sitting with me during breaks, reminding me that I was doing the right thing. Vincent checked on me every evening, making sure I was okay, offering to install security cameras around my house. I accepted his offer, and he spent a weekend setting up a system that would alert my phone if anyone approached my doors. 2 days before the hearing, Kenneth called me for the first time since the day with the painters. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Ma," he said, and his voice sounded strange, strained. "We need to talk." "Kenneth, my lawyer has advised me not to speak with you directly. Please, Ma, just 5 minutes. I need to say something." Against my better judgment, I agreed. "I'm listening." Crystal and I were in trouble, real financial trouble. We're about to be evicted. The kids, they're going to end up in a shelter if we can't find a place. I'm begging you, Ma, please. Let us move in for just a few months while I get back on my feet. I got a job interview next week at a parts supplier. If I get it, we can start saving, and we'll be out of your hair in no time. I heard the desperation in his voice, and my mother's heart wanted to cave, wanted to say yes, wanted to save my grandchildren from the uncertainty he was describing. But I also heard what he wasn't saying. No apology for breaking into my house. No acknowledgement that they'd tried to have me declared incompetent. No admission that everything they'd done was wrong. Just another request for me to sacrifice my security for their convenience. "Kenneth, I love you. You're my son, and you'll always be my son. But the answer is no. You and Crystal made choices that led you to where you are now. You spent money on things you couldn't afford. You took loans from me you never intended to repay. And when I set a boundary, you tried to destroy me. We weren't trying to destroy you. We were just desperate. You called Adult Protective Services and lied about me being mentally incompetent. You tried to claim you had rights to my house. You hired painters to take over my bedroom without permission. Kenneth, that's not desperation. That's calculated manipulation. Crystal was behind all that. I told her it was going too far, but she wouldn't listen. Then you need to decide who you're married to, Kenneth. Your wife or your conscience. Because right now, you're letting her turn you into someone I don't recognize. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. When Kenneth spoke again, his voice was cold. "Fine, if that's how you want it. But don't expect me to be there when you're old and dying and need someone to take care of you. Don't expect your grandchildren to even know who you are. You're choosing a house over your family, and you're going to end up alone. Goodbye, Kenneth," I said, and I hung up before he could say anything else. My hands were shaking so badly I had to set the phone down on the kitchen table. Joanna's words came back to me. "Family doesn't try to destroy you to get what they want." Kenneth and Crystal had tried to destroy me. They'd tried to take my home, my independence, my dignity. And when that didn't work, they'd tried guilt and threats. But I wasn't going to let them win. The day of the hearing arrived. Michael met me at the courthouse, looking professional in a dark suit, carrying a briefcase full of evidence. Kenneth and Crystal were already there with their lawyer, a young man who looked barely out of law school. Crystal glared at me with pure hatred in her eyes. Kenneth wouldn't meet my gaze. The judge, a middle-aged woman named Patricia Okonkwo, listened to both sides present their arguments. Kenneth and Crystal's lawyer tried to paint me as a vindictive mother, punishing her son for having the audacity to ask for help. He claimed I'd initially agreed to let them move in, but then changed my mind capriciously. He suggested I was mentally unstable, pointing to my age as if being 64 automatically made me incompetent. Michael methodically destroyed every claim with documentation. The Adult Protective Services report showing I was fully competent. The timeline showing I'd never agreed to let them move in. The police report about the unauthorized entry. The cease and desist letter they'd ignored. The false text messages they'd tried to fabricate. The judge's expression grew more stern as the evidence piled up. When it was time for testimony, I took the stand and told my story simply and honestly. The judge asked me direct questions. "Mrs. Mitchell, did you ever give your son permission to move into your house?" "No, Your Honor." "I never did." "Did you give him permission to hire painters to work on your bedroom?" "No, Your Honor. I came home from work and found them there. I had no idea they were coming." "Did you invite him to live with you at any point, verbally or in writing?" "No, Your Honor." Kenneth and Crystal asked me for money multiple times over the years, which I gave them, but I never offered them my home. The judge turned to Kenneth. "Mr. Mitchell, do you have any evidence beyond your word that your mother agreed to let you move in?" Kenneth's lawyer shuffled papers nervously. "Your Honor, we have testimony from my clients that there were multiple conversations where Mrs. Mitchell expressed loneliness and suggested they move in with her." "Where are these witnesses?" the judge asked sharply. "Well, Your Honor, these were private family conversations. My clients are the witnesses." "So you're asking me to take your client's word over Mrs. Mitchell's word, even though your clients have already been caught fabricating text messages and making false reports to Adult Protective Services?" The lawyer had no good answer to that. The judge reviewed the evidence silently for several minutes, her face impassive. Finally, she looked up. "I'm granting the restraining order. Mr. Kenneth Mitchell and Mrs. Crystal Mitchell are prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Mrs. Bernice Mitchell's residence. They are also prohibited from contacting her directly or indirectly. Any violation will result in immediate arrest." Crystal stood up, her voice shrill. "This is ridiculous. That's Kenneth's mother. You can't keep a son away from his mother." "I can and I am," Judge Okonkwo said firmly. "Based on the evidence presented, your actions constitute elder abuse and attempted financial exploitation. Mrs. Mitchell has every right to protect herself and her property. Furthermore, I'm referring this case to the prosecutor's office for potential criminal charges related to the forged text messages and the false report to Adult Protective Services." Crystal's face went pale. Kenneth finally looked up, and I saw something in his eyes that might have been regret or might have been anger. I couldn't tell anymore. I didn't know my son anymore. As we left the courtroom, Crystal hissed at me as she walked past. "You're going to regret this. When you're lying in a nursing home bed with nobody visiting you, you'll regret choosing that house over your family." Michael put his hand on my arm, steering me away from them. "Don't engage. Let them go." Outside the courthouse, I finally let myself breathe. It was over. The restraining order meant they couldn't come near my house. The referral to the prosecutor meant there might actually be consequences for what they'd tried to do. I'd won. So why did I feel so hollow? "Mrs. Mitchell," Michael said gently, "you did the right thing. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you protected yourself from people who were actively trying to exploit you." "I protected myself from my own son," I said, tears finally spilling over. What kind of mother has to get a restraining order against her own child? "The kind of mother who raised her child to know right from wrong and then watched him choose wrong anyway," Michael replied. "This isn't your failure, it's his." The weeks after the hearing were strange and quiet. I went to work, came home, tended my small garden, watched television in the evenings. The security cameras Vincent had installed gave me peace of mind. Nobody approached my house. Nobody violated the restraining order. Kenneth and Crystal had apparently moved in with one of Crystal's relatives in Warren, according to Vincent, who kept his ear to the ground in the neighborhood. Part of me wondered about my grandchildren, about Kenneth Jr. and little Jasmine. Were they okay? Did they miss me? Did they understand why Grandma wasn't in their lives anymore? But I couldn't let myself think about that too much, or the guilt would consume me. I'd left the door open. If Kenneth wanted a relationship with me, he could have one, but it would be on terms of mutual respect. He would have to acknowledge what he'd done wrong. He would have to apologize. He would have to prove that he valued me as a person, not just as a resource. So far, he hadn't done any of those things. Joanna organized a small celebration at the diner to mark my victory, though it didn't feel much like a victory. My coworkers brought potluck dishes, and we ate together after closing, and they toasted to my strength and independence. To Bernice, Joanna raised her glass. The toughest woman I know. She worked 22 years to own her own home, and nobody, not even family, is going to take that away from her. Everyone cheered, and I managed to smile, grateful for these friends who'd supported me through the worst months of my life. These were my real family, I realized. Not the people who shared my blood, but the people who showed up when I needed them, who believed in me, who respected my right to make my own choices. That night, I stood in my bedroom, looking at the half-painted walls I still hadn't finished. The peach color I loved, and the white paint that represented Kenneth and Crystal's invasion. I made a decision. The next day was Saturday, my day off. I went to the hardware store, bought paint supplies, and spent the entire day painting my bedroom walls. Not white, not peach. A soft lavender color I'd always loved, but never had the courage to choose before. This was my house. My walls. My choice. With each brushstroke, I felt myself reclaiming the space that had been violated. By evening, the room was transformed. Fresh and new and completely mine. I hung new curtains, light purple ones that matched the walls. I moved my furniture back where I wanted it. I placed my restored dresser in the perfect spot by the window. When I was finished, I stood in the doorway and looked at my bedroom, my sanctuary, my space. It was beautiful, it was mine, and nobody could take it away from me. 6 months passed. The prosecutor's office decided not to pursue criminal charges against Kenneth and Crystal, citing lack of resources for family disputes, but the restraining order remained in place. I settled into a new normal, a life that was quieter but also more peaceful than it had been in years. I wasn't constantly worried about what Kenneth and Crystal would ask for next, what emergency they'd manufacture, what guilt trip they'd deploy to get money or favors from me. The holidays came and went: Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. For the first time in 37 years, I didn't cook a big meal for Kenneth. I didn't buy presents for my grandchildren. Instead, Joanna invited me to her daughter's house, and I spent Thanksgiving with people who genuinely wanted me there, who appreciated the sweet potato pie I brought, who included me in their family traditions with warmth and kindness. Christmas I spent quietly at home, watching old movies and drinking hot chocolate, and I felt more at peace than I had in years. On New Year's Eve, Vincent knocked on my door with a bottle of sparkling cider and 2 glasses. We sat in my living room and toasted to new beginnings, to strength, to the courage it takes to choose yourself even when it means disappointing people you love. "You did good this year, Bernice," Vincent said. "You stood up for yourself. That takes real guts." I didn't feel brave, I admitted. I felt terrified most of the time. "That's what bravery is," he replied. "Being terrified and doing the right thing anyway." In February, almost a year after the incident with the painters, I received a letter. Not from a lawyer this time, just a handwritten envelope with Kenneth's familiar scrawl. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter was short. "Ma, Crystal and I are getting divorced. She left me for some guy she met at work. Took the kids to Ohio with her. I'm alone now, living in a room I rent by the week, working 2 jobs just to pay child support. I know I messed up. I know I let Crystal manipulate me into doing terrible things to you. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking for money or a place to stay. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. If you ever want to talk, you have my number. If you don't, I understand. Love, Kenneth." I read the letter 3 times, sitting at my kitchen table with tears running down my face. Part of me wanted to call him immediately, to tell him I forgave him, to invite him over for dinner. But another part of me, the part that had grown stronger over this past year, knew that an apology in a letter wasn't enough. Actions matter more than words. Kenneth had shown me through his actions that he saw me as a resource to exploit. One letter couldn't erase that. I put the letter in a drawer and went about my day. A week later, Kenneth called. I let it go to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. He called again the next week. This time, I answered. Ma? His voice sounded uncertain, vulnerable in a way I hadn't heard since he was a child. I'm here, Kenneth. Did you get my letter? I did. I meant every word. I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I see now what I did, how I let Crystal use you, how I betrayed you. Kenneth, I appreciate the apology. I do. But I need you to understand something. An apology doesn't automatically erase what happened. Trust is built slowly and destroyed quickly. You destroyed my trust in you. If you want to rebuild it, that's going to take time and consistent action, not just words. I understand. What do you need from me? I thought about it carefully before answering. I need you to respect the boundaries I set. I need you to prove over time, through your actions, that you've changed. I need you to understand that I love you, you're my son, and you always will be, but I'm not a bank or a backup plan or a problem solver for your life choices. Okay, I can do that. Can we maybe get coffee sometime? Just talk? Not yet. Maybe in a few months. Let's start with phone calls, see how that goes. Okay, Ma, whatever you want. I miss you. I miss my mother. I miss my son too, I admitted. But I need to know that son is really back, that he's not just showing up because Crystal's gone and he has nobody else. We talked for a few more minutes, and when we hung up, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the possibility of forgiveness somewhere down the road. Over the next months, Kenneth called every Sunday. We'd talk for 30 minutes, nothing deep, just updates about his life, questions about mine. He never asked for money. He never suggested moving in. He just called and talked, building back a connection one conversation at a time. In May, I finally agreed to meet him for coffee at a diner on the east side, neutral territory, public space. When I arrived, he was already there, waiting. He looked thinner, older, tired. He stood up when he saw me, and for a moment we just looked at each other. Ma, he said, and his voice broke. I'm so sorry. We sat down and talked for 2 hours. Kenneth told me about his divorce, about how he'd finally seen Crystal for who she really was when she left him for someone with more money, how he realized she'd been using him the same way they'd both been using me. He told me about his 2 jobs, about the tiny room he rented, about how hard he was working to pay child support and build a relationship with his kids despite the distance. And slowly, carefully, I started to believe that maybe the son I'd raised was finding his way back. We didn't hug when we parted. We didn't make plans to see each other again soon, but we agreed to keep talking, to keep rebuilding, one conversation at a time. Today, almost 2 years after Kenneth and Crystal tried to take my house, I'm still living in my home in Detroit. I still work at the Blue Plate Diner, though I've cut back to 4 days a week. I still have coffee with Joanna every week. Vincent still checks on me regularly, and Kenneth and I talk on the phone every Sunday. You're never too old to stand up for yourself. You're never too old to set boundaries. And you're never too old to choose your own dignity over other people's entitlement, even when those people are family. Because at the end of the day, the family that matters most is the one that respects you, supports you, and values you for who you are, not what they can take from you. That is Bernice Mitchell's story. Now I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this from? What city? What country? Drop it in the comments below. I love seeing our global community come together over these stories about family boundaries, elder abuse, and the moment when a mother has to fight to protect what's rightfully hers. Real question: if you were Bernice, what would you have done? Would you have let Kenneth and Crystal move in to avoid conflict? Would you have called the police immediately when you found the painters? Or would you have fought back just like Bernice did? Tell me in the comments. Hit that like button if this story made you feel something. Share it if you know someone dealing with family members who see them as a resource instead of a person. Someone whose adult children expect them to sacrifice everything. Someone who needs to know that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's survival. And subscribe for more raw, real stories about standing up to entitled family members, adult children who exploit their aging parents, the fight to protect your home from people who think they deserve it, and what happens when you finally choose your own dignity over other people's demands. Thanks for watching. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you most are the ones who hurt you worst. Sometimes being a good parent means saying no to your adult children. Sometimes protecting yourself means cutting ties with people who only see you as a bank account or free housing. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand alone rather than be surrounded by people who are slowly destroying you. See you in the next video.